So tell me about your childhood. Where are you from?
Well, I was born in Paterson, New Jersey on September 13th, 1970. We traveled around with my dad. Of course, my sister Cindy was born in 1971 in Manhattan, New York. We traveled around with my dad, my mom, my dad. My dad was a pro wrestler known as the Cuban Assassin. He was the original Cuban Assassin.
Mm.
And he traveled around. We traveled around with him until we got to the Maritimes up for Emile Dupree's Atlantic Grand Prix Wrestling in 1975. My dad and my mom thought, you know, because I'm getting ready to turn 5. I was getting ready to turn 5 years old, and thought that we should be enrolled in school. So he had my mom bring me and my sister to her hometown of Oak Hill, West Virginia, which is where my mom was born and raised, and where she lived all her life, except for the time she traveled with my dad. And that's where I've been ever since 1975. Of course, I went to the school here, Oak Hill High School, graduate in 1989. And of course, my dad and my mom, they had separated and divorced in 1980. And my dad had another family in Canada. So I have another brother and sister. I got a brother and sister, Sean and Angie, and from a different marriage. From my stepmother, Pat, my mom's name's Yvonne, but she passed away in December of last year. Uh, and then,
Sorry.
oh, thank you.
Oh,
But then my dad's still alive though. He's 83 years old. He lives in Lethbridge, Alberta, Canada. My sister and my brother helped take care of him. I was taking care of my mom. My other sister, Cindy, she had moved to Florida with her husband, so I was left here taking care of my mom. Uh, but the but my dad flew me up in 1989, and my dad's like an old school kind of guy because my dad's from the late 1960s, 1968, and his last match he ever really wrestled was in 2003, and he did one more match, which was a tag team match with me and Lipalani Poffo in Berwick, Nova Scotia, the old Berwick Arena, which is the last match, last main event ever in that arena. It's tore down, and they built a new arena right down the road from it called the Apple Dome. And so my dad uh, did that one match at one time, and that was his last match. And that was back in 2009, and for a different group called UCW up here in Canada. And and that's kind of a odd thing there too with Lanny Poffo, because there's kind of like a synchronicity between Lanny Poffo and myself. Of course, my dad knew Lanny Poffo many years ago, and his brother Macho Man Randy Savage and his father Angelo Poffo, because they were all up in Premier Prix for Land Grand Prix. I think like in I want to say 79, but it probably was 1980, 1981, probably more accurate around the date. Because after the Poppos left there, they came back and created the ICW group,
mm-hmm.
their own
In
their own
Kentucky.
promotion. Yeah, and an outlaw promotion. Uh, and and that's when they started that. And but when they had ICW at that time, my mom with her next husband, my stepfather, DJ, Donald Dempsey, he uh, he was a big wrestling fan. My stepdad, he took. I remember he took me, my sister, and his other son, my stepbrother Scott. My mom would took us to the what was then called the Raleigh County Armory, but now is the Beckley Convention Center, and to see ICW. So I was watching Macho Man Randy Savage as the ICW heavyweight champion, and his dad was the under the mask as the Miser, and his brother Lipa Lane Poffo was the television champion. Okay, at that time for ICW. So I'm watching from the second tier of Lenny Poffo, and I told him this before he died. And then that was like around 1982. If I and then later on, fast forward to 1998, I'm in Columbus, Ohio for Bull Miller's IWA Back Alley Brawl, which was he ran IWA, but he had a local public access television show called IWA Back Alley Brawl. I walk in the locker room, and there's Leaping Lanny Poffo sitting there in the locker room. So I went from a fan to being on the booked on a card that he was in, and that he was on up in Columbus. And I never forget when I walked in, Lanny Poffo was looking at me because I look so like my dad. I'm almost people confuse us a lot. So you know, he looked at me. He goes, "I know your father. I know him well. I tell you right now, I saw him punch a man out with one punch, and I knew right then and there I'm going to be that man's best friend." And that's what he told me right there in the locker room there. And then fast forward to 2009. Now I'm in a six-man tag team match with Lee Palani Poffo and my dad at Burke Arena at Burke, Nova Scotia, Canada. So from Beckley, West Virginia, I was a fan. 1982, watching Lanny Poffo to 1998, I was on the same locker room, same card as him for IWA Back Alley Brawl in Columbus, Ohio. And then back in 2009, I'm in six-man tag with him in the main event, along with my dad at the Burke Arena in Burke, Nova Scotia. So it's kind of like a big synchronicity. And it's kind of like went full circle with
Mm-hmm.
Lanny Poffo, and we became good friends because of that. You know, we stayed in touch until his dying day.
What a loss. What was it like
Yeah.
being around Lanny? How was he like being around him?
Well, Lanny was actually a really nice guy, you know, and he was kind of reserved, but when you ask him a question, he definitely would answer it for you. And he wanted to educate people, you know, because he's very articulate. He's a very educated person. Uh, and he wanted to educate people about pro wrestling. And he would say, I may not be right, but my father told me we should do it like this. And it made him lots of money, and it should make you money too. You know, he would give advice and stuff like that for a lot of the guys and everything. And he would tell me stories about dad. Uh, there's a lot of stories about my dad. I mean, and a lot of people don't realize my dad was born and raised in Puerto Rico, and growing up in the streets of Puerto Rico during his time, they all carry knives. And
Oof.
my
Yeah.
dad knew how to how to hide a knife on him. And that was the street fighting days. As opposed today, they just shoot you. You know, back then, but during my dad's time, they would stab you. So, and that was in the streets of Puerto Rico, and that was a long time ago. I mean, my
Mm-hmm.
dad is 83 years old. So you're looking around what to 1945, 40, 1950, and he's a kid. My mom was born in 1950, and I'm 30 years younger than my dad, and I'm only 20 years younger than my mom. So, and my son's 30 years younger than me.